I hope that American analysts and strategists understand that they are failing. China's the world's low-cost producer of photovoltaics, of batteries, of electric vehicles, of wind turbines, of fourth-generation nuclear, of 5G. I just wanted to add a footnote, which is that China's also not a threat.
I know a lot of audiences, they saw your conversation with Professor Mearsheimer.
And when you live in an anarchic system, and this is the international system, there's no higher authority. In that anarchic world, the best way to survive is to be really powerful.
John gives a good answer, which is if you want to interpret American foreign policy, it is to maximize power. We have some differences, but I think it's a very good description of American foreign policy.
How do you think about that conversation?
Well, first of all, Professor Mearsheimer is a wonderful scholar and a very good friend, but we disagree on our outlook, of course, with regard to the geopolitics of the world today. He thinks that conflict is pretty much inevitable because great powers clash. I believe that it's possible to get along because I don't think that there are fundamental differences of interest between the United States and China. In fact, I think the relationship is a positive sum relationship. China's well-being is good for the United States. U.S. well-being is good for China. There is no deep reason for conflict, but this is our difference of point of view.
And you also argue that in terms of economy, that the United States moving out the production line out of China is not going to solve any problem in the United States.
It may make things less efficient. It may make all of you lose a bit more money or not make as much money. But is it going to solve any single economic problem in the United States? No way.
While at the same time, we see both parties actually are pushing for the so-called decoupling. What's going on?
Well, what's going on is that starting around 2010, the American strategists came to the view that China's economic rise was no longer in America's interest. Again, this was a very naive and wrong assessment because it was based on a zero-sum vision of the world, that if China rises, America must be going down. Whereas in economic terms, we aren't in a zero-sum world, we're in a positive-sum world. China's growth, its technological advance improves the U.S. economy. The U.S. Growth and advance improves China's economy. In fact, when I had the discussion with John Mearsheimer, I was in California, and I think California has been enriched by China's economic development. A lot of people have made a lot of money based on China's economic growth, a lot of investments, a lot of very efficient production, for example, of my Apple iPhone. You know, it's produced in China, it's sold to countless millions of consumers around the world. It's good for Apple, it's good for us consumers, it's good for China for employment. This is how economics works. It's mutually beneficial. It's not good for one and bad for the other. Well, they were very surprised to hear that because we hear every day that China's bad for the United States. And this is simply a mistaken concept, but it plays into fear and it plays into ignorance.
Like $1 million to somebody from China.
To the PRC,
the Department of Commerce,
Chinese, about
People's Republic of China, to work on issues that matter to the American people.
It's not to say that in some parts of the U.S., probably China's competitiveness has hurt local businesses in the United States. But in other places, it's dramatically improved the businesses in the United States. And what economic logic and history shows is that the gains definitely outweigh the losses, and that if the United States had better policy, instead of blaming China, it would have some internal redistribution so that the winners would be helping to compensate the losers. And so it's no reason for the U.S. to blame China. It should be blaming itself for not having the right institutions internally to upgrade the workforce and move into new sectors with sufficient speed.
But the issue is not just in Washington. What we see right now, more and more Americans have less and less positive views towards China. And China, they don't build like 300 military bases around the United States. They don't send out troops to patrol the West. And why the public opinions are getting less and less positive?
Well, the public opinion is very much swayed by the official propaganda. And the U.S. official propaganda is that China is a threat. In fact, we even hear people talking openly about war with China within the next few years. Of course, I think that this is grotesquely irresponsible. There is no cause of war at all. This kind of talk should be absolutely not undertaken by responsible officials. And the propaganda from the U.S. government has been pretty relentless in the last 10 years. This is very unfortunate and very irresponsible and very dangerous, I can add. In the end, American foreign policy is made by a relatively small group. It's not made by public opinion. It is driven by strategists in the security apparatus, the intelligence agencies, the Pentagon, the White House, the National Security Council. These people ought to know better. On the one hand, it's quite clear that American foreign policy is failing everywhere. Even the meeting in the BRICS in Kazan is a demonstration of failure. If you look at the 36 governments that were around the table in Kazan, they represent 57% of the world population. And in addition to those 36, there are dozens more that are very sympathetic. The large majority of the world does not believe that it is in the Western camp. If anything, it believes that it is in the group of countries seeking economic and sustainable development. It doesn't want to be in anybody's camp. It wants to have peace, security, and economic advancement.
We believe that we have a right, we have a responsibility, and we have the power to run around the world and remake the world in America's image. Most people in the foreign policy establishment, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, they believe that. And that is what has motivated our foreign policy in large part since the Cold War ended.
The U.S. foreign policy is based on the idea of hegemony, that the U.S. must be the dominant power in every region of the world. But if you aim for that, you're bound to be in conflict with other powerful countries. And so the very definition of U.S. foreign policy puts us on a path of conflict. Now, can this change? Yes, because what is happening is not working.
Will those in favor of the draft resolution please raise their hand? Abstention.
So any new group should absolutely analyze why is it that most of the world does not subscribe to the U.S. version of events? Why is it that most of the world is not together with the United States, for example, regarding the wars in Ukraine and in the Middle East? I hope that American analysts and strategists understand that they are failing and that bullying and making demands will not work. It won't work against China, it won't work against Russia, it won't work against even small countries now which have choices. So this is my hope. It's not a high probability, frankly, of a quick change, but it's not impossible.
Right. Now let's turn to the Middle East. You just mentioned about that. I'm always curious why the United States keep evolving into the Middle East and cause so much bitterness around in the Muslim world.
Well, the U.S. Foreign policy often is led by very specific interest groups. And in the case of the Middle East, the so-called Israel lobby has been the dominant influence of American policy. So much of what's happening in the Middle East comes from the fact that there is unrest in Palestine and Israel, because while there is a state of Israel, there is no state of Palestine. And so millions of Palestinian Arabs are living under Israeli domination in a kind of apartheid regime. And this leads to unrest. And the answer to the unrest is very clear. There should be a state of Palestine. The government of Israel has said, no, we want to dominate the territory. We don't want a Palestinian state. We will not give political rights to the people of Palestine. We will just rule over them. Israel's idea is very simple, which is that if there is unrest, Israel will crush it. If other countries support the unrest, Israel will go to war with them. And if a major country like Iran backs militias or resistance groups that are fighting Israel's domination, then Israel wants to go to war with Iran. Now, the fact of the matter is, Israel could not win a war with Iran. It needs the United States to fight that war. And so it's trying to get the United States to go to war with Iran. But it's not America's interest at all to have a war with Iran. But the political lobby of Israel drums up fear, drums up hatred, drums up a war atmosphere, and the American people don't like what's happening. It's time that the US, China, Russia, Britain, France, in the UN Security Council say there's a Palestinian state whether Israel likes it or not. The borders are those of the 4th of June, 1967. The UN is going to place peacekeeping forces to keep the two sides apart from each other, and we're going to move forward rather than having an escalating Middle East war. This would be the right approach. No difference of interest whatsoever between China, Russia, and the US in this case, because a spreading Middle East war is bad for everybody. So the great powers should get together and put the solution into operation.
And furthermore, by getting bogged down in Ukraine and now bogged down in the Middle East, it's become very difficult for us to pivot to Asia to deal with China, which is the principal threat that we face.
I just wanted to add a footnote, which is that China's also not a threat. It's a market. It's got great food, great culture, wonderful people, a civilization 10 times older than ours. It's not a threat. We can also note that China has become the world's low-cost producer of many, if not most, of the technologies we need for the green transition. China's the world's low-cost producer of photovoltaics, of batteries, of electric vehicles, of wind turbines, of fourth-generation nuclear, of 5G, of long-distance power transmission, and so forth. Well, this is a great result for China. It's very good for countries that are partners with China in the Belt and Road Initiative, for example, because they get low-cost technology at very effective, good prices. For the United States, the real lesson is that during this last 10 years when China was building up its industry in these sectors, the United States was doing very little. It was debating, should we go to electric vehicles or not? Well, China said yes, it went to electric vehicles. Something like 400 producers got into the highly competitive market. Now it's being shaken down to a few, but these few are superb. And we have one. We have Tesla, very good, but it's one. China has dozens, hundreds even. And this is a big difference between the United States and China in the last 10 years. China just made this transformation. It went ahead. It didn't debate it. It did it. And the United States should do it as well. Rather than complaining about China,